with the witness, I just wanted to make mention of the fact that, as previously arranged, the Premier of the province is present to take the stand. And from what has been discussed last week, that we need to make use of these 2 days for witnesses. I'll urge or request that we deal with the real issues without much more detail, so that we can be able to accommodate all the witnesses. I'm saying this without wanting to sound that I'm limiting cross-examination of my learned friends. Thank you.
Yes, we have to reach the Premier today and finish his evidence so that we can wrap up tomorrow. So you make a good point, but Council, you may proceed.
Thank you, Justice. I'd like to think that I am dealing with the real issues. I'm mindful of time, but I would like to get through what I've been instructed to do.
I'm not inferring that insinuation, Council. I hope Advocate Utama doesn't mean that you are not dealing with the issues. I think you have raised very important points, and I hope that's not the reference to your cross-examination. Please proceed.
Thank you, Justice. MEC, we were, before the adjournment, I started to talk about the reasons for the decision. So one of the reasons...
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. Aviwe, could you find my glasses, please? Thank you. Thanks. You may proceed.
And one of the issues is something that we've been discussing all morning, and that's the question of budget and availability of money. No matter how much we probed the officials, that was the answer. It's played like a trump card. And once government tells you that there's no money, then there's nothing you can do. But this morning we've dispatched that argument. There are two other, reasoning from the department. But there are two other reasons that were provided. One of which was that the Auditor General raised a concern about the length of the contract with Esidimeni, which dates back to 1979, and that was one of the reasons for the termination was to respond to the Auditor General's concern. Before I go any further, I'd just like to know whether you're aware of that concern, whether that was something that was discussed with Treasury, and what your view is on that.
Ma'am, I would not have been privy to discussions that might have taken place between officials of the Auditor General's office and the department. But because I was aware that this information had been put before the inquiry last week, I checked the management letters from 2013-14 up to the end of the last financial year, 16-17. Now, those documents are not public documents, but I got the Provincial Accountant General to check those management letters for me. Each one of those letters is an encyclopedia in its own right. She could not find any reference to the Life Esidimeni contract in the management letters that were given to the department. If it was an audit query of significance, my expectation is that it would be in those management letters. So I am not saying it may not have been raised in conversations, but it is not in the management letters, and the management letters are what guides us as Treasury and also provincial departments as to what issues they must address in subsequent financial years.
And you're saying certainly if it was serious, it would be in writing. It wouldn't be in a conversation, a concern such as this.
It ought to be in the management letters, ma'am.
Thank you. So we have not been provided with any evidence, in the same way that you haven't been able to find it, other than the say-so of the officials who've come here that happened. that concern was raised. But let's assume that it was raised. Would the solution to that be to terminate the contract and then enter into agreements with a range of other entities without a tender process? Would it address the concern? Assuming that that was a concern of the Auditor General.
Well, I suppose one might also want to consider, would there have been other ways of solving the problem? In government, there are and by the way, this is not it's not, it doesn't, I did clarify to the Justice that this falls under transfers of not-for-profit institutions. But let's say, for example, that the department valued the services that Life Esidimeni was providing, and in the department's view, these were unique services that could not be provided by other people. It is possible, in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, to argue that these are unique services and nobody else provides them, and you need to stay with your existing service provider. So all I'm saying to you, ma'am, is that it wasn't a problem that could only be solved in one way.
Thank you. That answers my question. On the question of transfers to non-profit organizations, can there be payments to non-profit organizations or contracts and engagements with non-profit organizations without a tender process?
Yes, ma'am, because it doesn't fall under what is known as the goods and services budget. It falls under the transfers budget, and the social sector departments all transfer money to non-governmental organizations. The key thing that they need to put before Treasury is, are these organizations following whatever regulatory environment is required, and what is the service level agreement that exists, what services are going to be provided at what cost. So and there would also need to be the development of a business plan. So you would need to say, I need patient beds, I need this kind of patient bed, these kind of services, and I want to recruit non-governmental organizations to fulfill these services, and then there would have to be service level agreements with each one of those.
So, and we know that there wasn't the case here, but just on the question of tendering, even in the amounts that we are talking about here, the millions that had to be paid, or for that matter, Esidimeni as an NPO,
no, it wouldn't go out. It's a transfer, because it's a not-for-profit institution. What would go out to tender would be goods and services where the assumption is that the institution is making a profit.
So if it's making a profit, that would be the test.
That is yes.
And not the amount of money. So you could pay 250 million on the understanding that it's a non-profit organization.
Yes, that is, and provided you have a business case and a service level agreement that spells out exactly what services you are receiving.
The third reason, I'm moving off the Auditor General and just the circumstances around that, and no evidence, as I said, has been put up to substantiate that claim. The third reason was deinstitutionalization, the policy of deinstitutionalization. And for the purposes of the discussion between you and me, I'd like to look at the budget and how it makes sense in relation to this reason of deinstitutionalization. So if I could refer you to...
Ma'am, can I say something before we go into the budget issue?
Yes.
You see, if there is a policy change in the way in which you are providing services, that policy change must serve before the Executive Council. There was no policy change that was tabled before the Executive Council in relation to the deinstitutionalization of patients. So if what you were saying to us, which is what we understood, I've got a contract, I can provide the same service more cheaply if I do it in-house. That does not have to go before the Executive Council. But if what you're saying is, I have a contract, I want to do something else. Because the contract, as I understand the Life Esidimeni contract, we're talking about patients with chronic conditions that needed care on a permanent basis. Deinstitutionalization, in my understanding, and I'm not a health professional, is that people would be managed in their own homes. Now, I think it's very important to say to you that no policy was brought to the Executive Council on this matter prior to its serving on the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee does not have the power to take policy change decisions. And I think part of the reason, Justice, that I spent a lot of time explaining the budget process was to explain to this inquiry that policy decisions must be taken in the Executive Council, they must be taken in the Executive Council lekgotla, but they don't get taken in budget processes. That is what I would respectfully call policy change by stealth. And it is possible that that is what we are dealing with in this instance. But it's very important to say to you, ma'am, that there was no conscious decision taken by the Gauteng provincial government to implement a policy of deinstitutionalization.
What we also know in any event is that the reason, the deinstitutionalization reason can't sit together with the reason that was provided before the Budget Committee, which is that they would be taken into provincial hospitals, because that contradicts deinstitutionalization. So the two can't sit side by side. They would have to pick one, which they were unable to do. But
you shake your head, MEC. You agree with that, isn't it?
I agree with you, ma'am.
Yeah.
If the policy were, I hear what you say about the policy change, but even if they were to come back and say, no, it wasn't a policy change, it was policy already there, it was an administrative decision that was taken, even if they were to say that, that doesn't help them, because Administrative Justice Act then requires particular processes where they make a decision where the rights of the public are affected.
Indeed.
Thank you. But let's look at the budget, because if, and again, it's a charitable interpretation, if we say that there was some attempt to strengthen community services and deinstitutionalize at the same time, that the numbers should show that that is happening. For example, you're cutting down Esidimeni, you say it's deinstitutionalization. We know that the deinstitutionalization policy says the money must follow the patient. And what I want to test with you is whether the money followed the patient. And to do that, I'd like you to have a look at, in LR 159, the very last page of 159, is a tape.
It says audited outcomes.
That's right.
Yes, ma'am.
This is a table that all of the pages preceding this page support the figures that are in this table. So it's really basically a summary of what are in the preceding pages in this exhibit. drawn from the annual financial statements, the audited financial statements. And what I want to refer to is, if you look down the table to community-based services, that is for mental health NPOs,
Yes.
starting 2012-13,
Yes.
the appropriation was 266 million.
Yes.
And then in 2013-14, it goes down to 86 million. And then it starts to rise a little to 110, and you can see the percentage rise there just for our convenience. So the first thing that's important is that when we are in 2016-17, we're looking at 142 million roughly, which is still not back up to the level that we were in 2012-2013. So that's not consistent with the policy of strengthening community-based services. Because if you were to strengthen community-based services, more money would be flowing in the direction of community-based services. Does that make sense?
On the face of it, I would agree with you, ma'am. I mean, we would need to check whether there's any other factor. But on the face of it, I would agree with you, ma'am.
And if we look at the Esidimeni allocation, which is just above the community-based services, and the numbers are the same as in the document LO160 you provided, we see the decrease, particularly 14-15 to 15-16, 16-17, drastic reduction. But the increase that happens in the community-based service is minimal.
Yes, ma'am.
Would it be correct for me to say that this suggests that the money is not following the patient into the community?
Ma'am, can we just look at the Life Esidimeni, because I think you and I have different figures for 16-17.
I presume, Council, you are reading from page 15 of LO159.
Yes, but I'm happy to look at LO160, the table provided by the MEC, if that helps.
Yeah.
So, Council, I think we have slightly different figures there. So for 15-16, the actual expenditure on Life Esidimeni was 198 million.
Yes.
And for 16-17, the actual expenditure, according to our figures, was 83 million. So there is a bigger decrease than your figures show. But nevertheless, what we're not seeing is that decrease translating directly into the line above, being community-based
services. Yes.
And
so sorry, but just to clarify, my figures are not the actual expenditure, but the appropriation.
All right, and even
which is the same as yours.
And even on the appropriation, we would agree with you on 15-16, but not on 16-17.
The adjusted budget, 74,932.
And you've got, for 17, you've got 216992.
For 16-17. Are we looking at the same time? No, we've got 74,932.
I'm obviously looking at the wrong line. Okay, I'm with you now.
I thought, Council, I'm also lost.
I'm with you now.
Shall we steady it a little and see where we are?
So
I thought you started by asking questions related to LO159, and
yes,
in particular page 15.
Page 15, yes.
Which purpose to represent audited outcomes?
Yes.
So that presumably would be more reliable, even in these days of KPMG. So what, I mean...
So Justice,
are we looking at the Esidimeni line?
We're looking at two things. We're looking at the Esidimeni part of the table, which is headed Subsidy, Chronic Psych Care, Life Esidimeni in brackets. And then we're comparing that to the item below it, community-based services, mental health NPOs.
Yes.
And what I'm trying to do is to show that the drastic reduction on the one hand in Esidimeni doesn't correspond to a commensurate increase in the community services.
Yes. You don't see the same number. You see 142 million against a reduction from 228 million to 74.9 million.
Correct.
That's a point you make.
Correct.
What's your response, MEC?
No, I'm together with Council now, and I agree with Council. And I would want to say further, Council, that if you have to look at where did the money go, given the fact that the global figures remain more or less the same, you can see that there's an increase in psychiatric mental hospitals. And it would therefore support your argument that if there is a policy of deinstitutionalization, it's not reflected in the budget.
Yes, thank you.
So where did the money go to? You suggest, MEC, the money went to where?
Council, I'm back on LA 160.
Oh, you're back of LA 160. I'm looking at 159. And I ask you to look at that.
Yes, Provincial Hospital Services. Is it there? Is it on your table, Council?
On page 15 of LA 159.
The provincial hospital is in
Provincial hospitals, yes.
sub-program 4.3. And that's not expenditure, those figures. Again, just to clarify, that's the appropriation.
So the figures are not the same, Council, but I think it makes the same point that Council is making. If you look at Program 4, Provincial Hospitals, you can see there that the budget climbs from 956 million in 12-13 to 1 billion and 28 million
yes.
in 16-17. So it makes the same point that Council is making.
Would you agree that even then it doesn't correspond? The reduction in Esidimeni doesn't, even the increase at the provincial hospital is not equivalent to the reduction in Esidimeni?
Yes, Council.
Thank you. So then that puts paid to the third argument provided by the department, that deinstitutionalization was the reason, and that deinstitutionalization took place in accordance with the policy.
Yes, Council.
I just want to now look at 161, LS 161, that you provided us with this morning. Because that tells us a little bit about where money went. And what I wanted to point out is that there are several NGOs that were of particular concern in this project. And at least 3 of them, and I haven't had time to do a very detailed reconciliation, a very thorough reconciliation, but there's an NGO called Anchor, an NGO called Siabadinga, and an NGO called Bopelong. And none of these are reflected in this LR 161.
That is correct, Council.
And that's because, can you explain that?
Council, you will recall that what I did, and maybe it was an inadequate process, was that I took the list of NGOs that was provided by the MEC for Health in her parliamentary question reply. And that is the document we referred to in, I think it's file 3, page 1060.
Yes.
Because working over the weekend, I had to improvise and say what list of NGOs was put in the public domain, were there payments made to those NGOs. So if you give me additional names of NGOs, I will check on the system whether any payments were made to those NGOs, and we will submit I think there's other evidence I do need to submit to you. I'll submit it together with that.
Thank you, MEC. We would appreciate getting the figures on the additional NGOs because things changed after that parliamentary answer.
Council, can I just get the names again?
It's Anchor,
Anchor, yes.
Siabadinga,
Yes.
and Bopelong.
Thank you.
Sorry, there are two more. Rebafenyi.
We couldn't find any, we checked Rebafeni, and we couldn't find any evidence of payments, to Rebafeni.
And to Ubutle Benkosi.
No. We didn't check that one, Ubuhle.
Benkosi.
The three that we have that we couldn't find any evidence of payment is Mashimong, Omahluko, and Rabefeni.
Thank you. And then finally on the tape, on this exhibit, Shama House. Shama House payments were made between August 2016 and March 2017 in the amount of about 3 million.
That is the evidence we found.
And I see it goes up until 9 March 2017. That would obviously mean, you see, Shama House, apart from many of these other NGOs, Shama House was one of those NGOs that didn't have a license as of July 2016. 21 July 2016, there was no license at Shama House. There was no nursing staff. The patients didn't have enough food. And it was, yeah, there's an audit report which has shown us that. That was the state of Shama House at 21 July. And what I'm correct to assume, I'd like to know, is that if payments were continuing until March 2017, that Shama House hadn't been shut down by that point, obviously.
I can't answer that, ma'am. I don't know, but what I know is that this is the record of payments that were made.
That payments went up to 9 March 2017 and nothing beyond that?
No, ma'am. And they only started on the 26th of August 2016.
Yes. That's also consistent with the evidence that we have in the hearing. My final question, MEC.
Just before you leave the schedule, Mosego, home-based care, it probably be the third page from the beginning of this.
Yes, Justice.
Received a whooping 13.5 million.
Yes, Justice.
And Council, I don't quite remember evidence on this particular NGO.
It's a sister of Takalani. It's a sister NGO.
Or it's a sister, it's a twin one to Takalani.
And it is where one of our clients, Marie Collins, her husband passed away at Mosego.
Yes.
Freddie Collins.
Yeah, we've got that evidence somewhere in the direction of Krugersdorp.
Yes, that's right.
And they paid 13.5 million. Of course, you wouldn't know much about that, would you, MEC? No?
As I said, Justice, this is evidence of payments that we found on the system. What the payments were for, I don't know.
And if one adds up these amounts, have they been added up? It's 47.5 million.
Yes, Justice.
Does it have any relationship with the audited number, which appears to be nearly 74 million, which you and Advocate Hasim debated not so long ago? In other words, when you look at the annual report of the province and you look at the amount which is supposed to have been spent on NGOs, the 74.932 million, is there any connection?
Justice,
your schedule in 161 and what we see on page 15 of LR 159.
Justice, the schedule, the 74.9 million was what was spent at Life Esidimeni, not on the NGOs.
Not on the NGOs.
Altogether, what was spent on the NGOs in 16-17 was 142
million, yes.
But my assumption is that there are NGOs that are catering for mental health services that are not part of these ones that are under controversy, that there are other services being provided in the system.
But we're not part of the Marathon project and the closure of Esidimeni.
That is my assumption.
I see.
Okay, but I don't have evidence
you
of
may
that.
Proceed, Counsel. Thanks.
Sorry, my last question is again in relation to your budget speech in March of 2015. And at page 18 of that speech, you spoke about the activist government as an activist government, that the provincial government and you understand that citizens don't want to be passive recipients of services, that they want to be active in implementing solutions. Knowing what you now know about the circumstances of this tragedy, do you agree that the families were not heard?
Yes, ma'am.
And if you're not aware, then you feel free to say so. Would you agree that the psychiatrists who also should be active in implementing solutions, their very solemn warnings were not heard?
It would appear, that would appear to be the case, ma'am.
I don't need you to say to respond, but what we've been able to establish through the hearings is that a number of other NGOs in the field, SADAG, a Depression and Anxiety Group, South African Federation of Mental Health, were also not heard, in fact were dismissed when their concerns were raised. This is what I would like you to respond to, this question. Within the ambit of your role and your position, your leadership role, would you be prepared to consider measures to ensure that that does not happen again? That, consistent with your remark in the budget speech, that as an activist government, we need to listen and include the recipients of the services in the implementation of services and service delivery. Would you be prepared to consider measures to ensure that what has taken place in this tragedy doesn't happen again?
Justice, the witness is being asked to give answers to matters which are outside her scope of responsibility, being Treasury. The matters which are being referred to are in particular reference to the Department of Health. It would be unfair to expect an answer from the witness.
I hear the objection. It may be good, Counsel.
Justice, I'm referring specifically to the budget speech by the MEC. And the issue of involving citizens is something that the provincial government should own as a whole. It's not about one portfolio or the other. I'm not suggesting that the witness was responsible for all of the issues I put forward.
I'm inclined to think Council should proceed, really. It's a matter which can be canvassed with the Premier, can be canvassed with... Her scope was quite clear when she was called. It was about the numbers and the finances. And I would want to urge Council to get on to the next question.
In that case, Justice, I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, MEC Creecy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel. Advocate Krause.
Thank you, Justice. MEC Creecy, my name is Lila Krause. I act together with Nzame Skibi, and we act for the survivors of this project. My learned friend have covered quite a substantial part of it. I'll try my best not to repeat it. Can I just ask you, perhaps it's also prudent that I apologize at this stage. I objected vehemently to your coming here, but I'm glad that you are here because you helped us a lot. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Can I just ask you, we've gone through the reasons that the department gave for closing Life Esidimeni and for killing and harming these people. If it wasn't for the reasons that they've given, for what reason did this happen?
Ma'am, my understanding is that the purpose of this inquiry is to establish that.
That's why we're asking you. Do you have any thoughts on it?
It's a series of events that fills me with shame, ma'am. But as to why it took place, I do not know.
Could there have been any person higher up in the hierarchy of government that ordered this?
I don't know, ma'am.
You weren't aware of that?
No, ma'am.
The reason I'm putting this to you is at about the same time in the Eastern Cape, the Life Esidimeni centres were also under threat to be closed by social development. Have you heard about that?
No, ma'am.
So you haven't heard the name of Life Esidimeni in government circles thrown around?
Prior to these hearings, ma'am, the only thing that I was aware of is that there is a Life Esidimeni substance abuse rehabilitation facility in Randfontein.
Yeah, and that was a court case where you were involved, is that not so?
I'm not aware that I was involved in a Randfontein court case. I'm aware that there's a different set of issues which gets termed Life Esidimeni but actually doesn't have anything to do with Life Esidimeni.
There was some issue about money not being paid over to somebody, and I see the Honourable Justice is mentioned in the case that it must be forwarded to him by the judge.
Yes, I'm aware that there has been a judgment in that case yesterday, I think, but I haven't seen it.
Can I just your PowerPoint that you shared with us, that the MEC for Health had shared that at the budget meeting. The MEC also provided us with that document. And I've asked the questions on that. And my reading of it was similar to your reading of it. But she denied that it could ever have meant that it would only be a 20% reduction.
Well, I suppose she should have said what she meant in her presentation.
You see, shortly thereafter, the head of the department wrote a letter to Life Esidimeni saying that there's a 20% reduction. So I think the head of the department also understood it that way. It's a logical conclusion that one would make from that PowerPoint. You would agree with that?
It was the interpretation that we understood at the time, ma'am.
One of the officials said that the placement of Life Esidimeni personnel was termed the Premier's project. Have you heard that word before?
No, ma'am.
When did the staff that need to be taken up by the department, the staff from Life Esidimeni, when did that first came to your knowledge?
On the 5th of November 2015, ma'am.
And the idea was?
That they should be absorbed into the department.
This has been a very expensive exercise for the department. You would agree, the whole arbitration. Are you aware of that?
Ma'am, I don't think justice has a price tag.
Yes, but it would have been less expensive if Life Esidimeni wasn't closed. Because we wouldn't have had this. Would you agree?
Ma'am, I think given the terrible, tragic loss of human life, that is what we should be focused on, not whether it cost more money or less money.
You see, it will be relevant if the Life Esidimeni was closed because of financial constraints. Then the cost of any remedies will have an important effect on that. Wouldn't you agree?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Okay. Maybe I should just put it a little bit clearer. What I'm saying is, if this was really a cost curtailment exercise, then it didn't work, because it's costing a lot at the moment.
There is no evidence that there was ever an intention to save money through this project, and I think that I have shown in the budget that I tabled on the budget for mental health that there is no evidence that there was cost-cutting on the mental health budget, and I dispute the suggestion that this was a cost-cutting exercise.
Yes, we hear you, and objectively we've already agreed with you before you came here, because all the objective evidence point the other way. That's not what I'm fighting with. We have evidence under oath to say it was, and that's what I'm putting to you. So if cost containment was a reason, it backfired. That's the only thing that I'm putting to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. There's just something that's bothering me, and this is the second last question that I put to you. I see on the papers the CFO of the Department of Health is also Mr. Muhlangu. Is he related to the MEC at all?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you. And then just the last question. I have it on my papers that in February 2017, Anchor had received their last payment, so there should be a record of their payments. It was on the 27th of February was the last payment to them. Could the court just give me a moment, Justice?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Justice. That's all questions we have. Thank you, MEC.
Thank you. Advocate Guchana.
Thank you, Justice. I will be
Yes, Ms.
I will be
Ina.
asking the questions in cross-examination. Justice, before I do that, I would like to hand up a copy of the judgment. I will explain the reason why it is necessary to do so. And
The judgment that saw the light of the day this morning. That one.
that is the one, Justice.
Yes.
It will be ELA 163. Copies have been circulated to my learned friends.
Well, somebody must write to Judge Spilk and say that the judgment came to my attention as required by his order, but I'm sure somebody in my office will do that and write back to the registrar that the judgment has reached me and has reached counsel in this hearing.
It has been circulated to my learned friends, I do confirm.
Very
Justice,
well.
the reason I'm handing it up, it appears on the order, which is on page 62 and 63 of the judgment.
Yes.
He indicated that the registrar is directed to forward a copy of this judgment to the responsible senior official or head of the Secretariat of Order number 3D, former Deputy Judge Chief Justice Musenege, in his capacity as the arbitrator in the Life Esidimeni Alternative Dispute Resolution proceedings being held at the Moeni Conference Center. Thank you.
Yes, you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice. Good afternoon, MEC Creecy.
Good afternoon.
My name is Nonhlanhla Yina. I'm one of the evidence leaders. I will be referring you to some parts of the judgment insofar as they are relevant to these proceedings. I note that you were an intervening party in those proceedings. Am I correct?
Provincial Treasury, yes.
Thank you. Ma'am, it's common cause that by June 2016, the Gauteng Department of Health had removed the mental health care users from Life Esidimeni, except for Baneng facility. Am I correct?
Sorry, ma'am, can you repeat what you're saying?
It's common cause that by June 2016, the Gauteng Department of Health had removed mental health care users from Life Esidimeni facilities to the various NGOs, except for Baneng.
I don't have direct knowledge of that, ma'am, but I will, if you say that that is the case, I accept what you're saying.
Thank you. I would like to refer you to page 44 of the document that I just sent it up to you. The second paragraph on that page of the judgment confirms that immediately after the removal of the mental health care users from Life Esidimeni, the Department of Social Services took over the facility. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Yes. Now, I think the point that Judge Spiel wants to make there is that, for instance, the evidence that was laid before this tribunal was that one of the reasons the Gauteng Department of Mental Health removed patients from Life Esidimeni is because they found it costly. You are aware of that. They found it to be expensive.
I am aware that they have claimed that, yes.
Yes. Now, the dilemma is that on the same month that they've closed Life Esidimeni, a department from the same province takes over the facility and uses it. The question then is that how is it that it was costly for Department of Health and then it is now not costly for the Department of Social Services? Do you wish to comment on that?
Ma'am, I can't comment on that. I think I have said to you that I am not convinced that this process was a cost-saving exercise.
Thank you. And then the second point that he makes in his judgment, in particular on page number 52, if you could just go to page number 52. Is that the other reason that was provided to this arbitration was that the tender procurement processes were not followed, and that was the reason the Department of Health decided to terminate the contract with Life Esidimeni. Yet, when social development took over, also it did not follow the procurement policies.
Ma'am, I've already explained to this inquiry that the budget for Life Esidimeni and the same budget that was later transferred to NGOs was not under the goods and services budget. It was under the budget for non-profit institutions, and therefore it was a transfer, and that transfer would be dependent on a business plan and a memorandum of understanding that this particular institution would be providing a set of services for government. So I think we have, I've already explained at length that in the perusal that Provincial Treasury has done of the management letters of the Auditor General, we found no evidence that the Auditor General was concerned about supply chain processes in relation to the tender of Life Esidimeni.
Indeed. In actual fact, Dr. Manamela herself stated that when the services of the NGOs, who subsequently took over the mental health care users, were procured, the procurement policies were not followed. And then she said the reason for that is because there were non-profit organizations. So the same reason then would apply to Life Esidimeni. That's what you are saying in essence.
Yes, ma'am.
Therefore, you are discounting the fact that it was because non-procurement policies were not followed that it was terminated. You are discounting that reason.
Ma'am, I could not find any evidence in the management letters from 2013-14 up to the present time that the Auditor General was concerned about that particular contract.
Thank you, Justice. That will be all from our side.
Yes. But I mean, it's a bit unfair, of course, to refer to a judgment which was issued hot out of the oven.
Thank you, Justice.
It's a bit unfair, but we'll look at the judgment quite tightly, and I think it's available before the parties. But the hair-raising thing there appears to be social development, taking money and paying it to a not-for-profit organization, and later suing to try and recover the money. And you must ask, why was it necessary to use a conduit in public funds?
Subsequent to this incident, Justice, the Gauteng provincial government has outlawed the use of conduits because what we understand is that the reason why there is a regulatory environment around how NGOs can be paid is in order to protect the public purse. And that if one is bypassing that regulatory environment by using conduits, then obviously you put the public purse at risk.
Was this a scheme to let money flow to these NGOs in ways that we now know could not be regulated?
Well, first of all, I'd like to read the judgment because
Yes.
I think this is an important case. But we have our own internal disciplinary process in relation to that, and that disciplinary process is still ongoing as we speak.
Advocate Groenewald.
Thank you very much, Justice. I don't think we're going to be too long. Good afternoon, MEC. My name is Dirk Groenewald.
Good afternoon.
I represent 4 of the family members who lost a loved one. MEC, I would just like to confirm, did I hear you correct to say that you knew of the absorption of the Life Esidimeni staff in November 2014?
2015, sir.
November 2015.
5th of November 2015, sir.
How did you learn about that?
There was a meeting which I attended with Premier Makhura, the MEC for Health and Organised Labour.
What was the purpose of that meeting?
The purpose was to discuss the absorption of those staff.
And what were you informed was Life Esidimeni to be closed down?
I think that was the first time, sir, when I became fully conscious of what had transpired.
What do you mean by that, ma'am? Were you informed that Life Esidimeni was going to be closed down and that the Department of Health had to absorb all the staff?
That's correct, sir.
So you said the Premier knew on the 5th of November 2015.
I said we attended a meeting where the absorption of the staff was discussed.
Well, ma'am, and the reason was because Life Esidimeni was going to be closed down.
That's correct.
That's correct. So did you confront the MEC at that point in time and said, listen, yeah, but this was contrary to the budget that you presented to us, and it's contrary to what you suggested to us that you're going to do? Did you confront her about it?
That's not my role.
It's not your role.
She's my colleague. I'm not her boss.
But it wasn't in line with the budget that she presented.
In that meeting, on the 5th of November, one still had the impression that these patients were being transferred to state institutions, and that is why these staff would be useful to the provincial department, because they would assist in those state institutions.
So you're telling us that you knew Life Esidimeni going to be closed down in totality, but all of those staff were going to be absorbed in our provincial hospitals.
Yes, sir.
And just as I understand you correctly, the Department of Health, for which period were they under administration?
It was from 2013 until 2015.
2013 to 2015.
Yes, in fact, I think it started in 2012. I will have to get you the exact dates.
Okay. Just to recap, ma'am, here you are presented with a budget by the department. At the end of 2014, they say to you that they're going to save money on a core function. That was contrary to the national policy at that time in respect of cost saving. You agree?
They didn't say they were what they said to us was that they were going to provide the same service in state facilities. And they believed that because they were insourcing the service, they would be able to provide that service more affordably. And our response to them was, you had better make sure that you provide the same quality of service.
But the long and the short is the presentation was, we're going to save money by doing something that is doing something against the national policy. We're going to save money by looking at a contract with Life Esidimeni, which involves a core function. That is the point.
What they said to us, sir, was that they were going to insource that service. They did not say to us that they were abolishing a core service.
But isn't it so, ma'am, that you should have confronted them and said, listen, yeah, we have stressed the point that our money-saving program, our cost savings, should not be focused on core functions. And you are focusing here on a core function. Why are you doing this?
That's precisely, sir, why we said to them that if you think you can provide the same service in-house, you had better provide the same level of service.
I think by now you're bound by the answer, Council.
Thank you very much, Judge.
Yes. I think the answer is quite clear, actually. We'll do it in-house, and if we do, we'll save 50 million.
And at the end of the next year, you know that that's not going to work because you're going to have to now take over the 47 million plus minus staff component, salary component of Life Esidimeni.
That's correct.
That's correct. Did you at any point in time raise the concern
What concern, sir?
Well, this concern, ma'am, they are not following what they said they were going to do. And you know about it. So all I'm asking you, in this period, 2014 to 2015, did you raise a concern? And if so, with whom did you raise that concern? To say that the Department of Life, Department of Health, is now terminating the contract with Life Esidimeni. They're not following the program or the project as they explained to us.
So even in the meeting in 2015, the impression was created that these patients were going to provincial hospitals.
Yes, ma'am, but they are now, they said to you, we're only going to reduce the beds by 20%. That's what they told you, end of 2014. Now, end of 2015, they tell you, we're going to close it down in totality.
That is correct, sir.
And my question is, have you raised the concern to say, listen, yeah, but this was not what you tabled in 2014 to us, what you're going to do?
So, in that meeting, they were still creating the impression to us that these patients were being transferred to provincial hospitals.
So you didn't query it, ma'am?
No, sir.
Then just with regards to the issue of accountability, you'll agree with me that we don't know exactly what's the figure now. What you have presented to us is 47 million rand that's been paid to NGOs in respect of the Gauteng Marathon project.
In terms of the NGOs that I checked over the weekend, yes, sir, those were the amounts involved.
But we know that that is going to be much more than that, because there's still a few NGOs that we need to check and see how much they receive.
Yes, I think it's 3 NGOs, sir.
Would you agree that this is a regular expenditure?
Why, sir?
Well, 143 people died, ma'am. We've paid money to people that couldn't provide the service, and 143 people died.
So what is the question to the witness?
The question is, Justice, would you agree that it was irregular expenditure?
I see. Thank you.
I would agree, sir, that this was an irregular practice. But in the government definition of irregular expenditure, I'm not sure that you would be correct in your assertion.
Thank you very much, Justice. No further questions.
Yes. It might have been fruitless expenditure, Counsel.
Fruitless, definitely,
Yeah.
Justice.
I think that's the term that maybe you'd have got us somewhere. Money, state money used, but produced no fruits. It was a fruitless expenditure. If anything, it produced death. Very well. Any re-examination?
Thank you, Justice. There are no questions in re-examination.
MEC Creecy, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you. Taking out the time, the weekend, to prepare the documentation. Much of it, prima facie, controverts a lot of the yarns or stories we've been told about why the project was embarked upon. The numbers are very helpful and leave us with deep discomfort, but explain some parts of our wonder about this project and why it was done, because its consequences are so dire and so shameful. But thank you for coming. It was helpful and necessary. We have a practice here where we allow every witness, as you would know by now, to say her bit at the end of her evidence. Is there anything you'd like at this stage to say?
Justice, I would like to take this opportunity, if I may, through you, to address the families who are here. What I want to say to you is that in different capacities, since 1994, I have served the Gauteng government. And I have always been proud of being a member of the Gauteng provincial administration in the broadest sense of the word. The testimony of suffering and cruelty that I listened to in the course of these hearings has never left me. And it filled me with a very deep sense of shame that I was part of this government when this terrible tragedy happened. If as a result of my testimony today, you feel that there are things which I should have done as the MEC of Finance and which I did not do, I apologize to you deeply and sincerely. I understand that your primary task is to mourn your loved ones and to come to terms in what way that you can with the tragedy that has befallen you. What I pray is that one day you will forgive us for whatever part we may have played. Thank you, Justice.
Again, thank you, MEC Creecy. We are going to move on to our next witness for the day. And I think it would be appropriate that we take a short break so that arrangements can be made to have the Premier here. And then we'll continue with that hearing. The break, again, thank you, MEC. The break will be very brief, after which we will proceed straight ahead. We are adjourned. Thank you. You may be seated. Premier, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Justice.
Would you put your full names on record? Before you're sworn in, I just want to have your full names put on record. If you just read your name into the mic.
Malemola David Makhura.
Thank you. Do you swear that the evidence, let me ask first, in which language do you want to give your evidence?
In English is okay.
In English, that's very well. Do you swear that the evidence you are about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth? And if so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. Councillor Lutamo.
Thank you, Justice. Good afternoon, Premier.
Good afternoon, Councillor.
You have been called before these proceedings pursuant to the recommendations of the Health Ombudsman in relation to the circumstances which led to the death of the mental health care patients. Yes. The parties have agreed, the legal representatives have agreed the terms of reference in terms of which these proceedings have to be conducted. And in that agreement, it was agreed amongst the parties that you will be coming through these proceedings as the Premier of Gauteng to offer an apology to those who have been affected by the tragedy which had been uncovered in the report by the Ombudsman. As we understand that your role is to proffer such an apology, we will not limit you to the apology. The legal representatives may require to pose certain questions emanating from this tragedy, and we take no issue with that approach. But for the purposes of these proceedings, I will allow you to deal with matters which are within your knowledge with regard to the tragedy which is subject to these proceedings. And I'll allow you to address those matters, and further questions will be put to you.
Thank you, Justice. Sa pele ke kopela ho dumedisa ho malapa a lahlehetsweng ba leng teng
Let's see
mona.
if we have an interpreter in the Sesotho language. I think we have, Premier.
Justice,
Shall we have the interpreter come through, please?
I can interchange.
I think you're quite entitled to.
I can interchange with English, Justice.
Yes, you're entitled to use just about any official language.
Yes, to save time. What I was saying, Justice, is that I would like to convey my greetings to the families of the deceased and the survivors of the Life Esidimeni tragedy who are here today. I am here today as the Premier of Gauteng Province to come here as the head of government in this province, not only to come and offer my apology, because I am accountable to the people of our province. I will like to apologize once more, as I have done a few times when we have interacted with members of the family, because an apology can never be enough. You have suffered. And we, as the Gauteng provincial government, are responsible for the pain and suffering of losing 143 mental health care patients and users in our province. So I would like to say, as the head of government in this province, since the start of this process, I have myself followed very closely all the witnesses who have come here, and I know, and I have seen that from the point of view of where you are as families, you have had very little about what happened and why, and a lot of blame shifting. You have had a lot of excuses, but very little about what happened and why. And I know that until you know what happened and why, you will not be able to heal. And I want to repeat that there can be no justice without the truth. So I am here to apologize once more, but to also answer questions about what I knew, and of those things that I knew, what did I do as the head of government in the province? Because I can't pass the buck. As the head of government in the province, the buck stops with me. The Constitution of our Republic, Section 125, vests executive authority in the province in the Premier, who must exercise that authority together with an Executive Council made up of members of the Executive Council, MECs. The Constitution also emphasizes that we are collectively and individually accountable. So whenever there's mention of accountability, it can't only be collective, it must also be individual accountability. And I am here also to account as per the Constitution, especially Section 132, which emphasizes collective and individual accountability. We know that apologizing doesn't mean a lot if there's no truth. And Justice, I hope at the end of my testimony and the testimony of MEC Creecy, MEC Ramokgopa, and Minister Mtswaledi, the families will come closer to the truth. And if there is no truth here, Justice, I will, as I said when we had the healing ceremony in 2017, I will work with the families to pursue the truth elsewhere and justice elsewhere. I am ready to answer if there are any questions, because the callousness and brutality that we have seen perpetrated against the mentally ill patients in our province does not represent in any way who we are as the Executive Council. It doesn't represent me either, but it happened under my watch. I am ready. I apologize because it happened under my watch. I apologize because it happened when I am the head of government here. I apologize because there are certain things I could possibly have done. I am ready.
Premier, thank you. Council.
Thank you, Premier. We have come to know of the actual number of the deaths of the mental health care users through these proceedings. And as I've said, through the recommendations of the Health Ombudsman. And the objective is obviously to uncover the truth in order to assist the families to reach or find closure in relation to the pain that they had to endure. What the families and the country at large would like to know is there has been mention of your office or your position or yourself as the Premier with regard to the implementation of what had come to be known as the Marathon Project. The families are anxious, want to know exactly what it is that you have known and at what stage. And I would like to give you that opportunity to be able to assist these families by giving an account with reference to a timeline, explaining exactly what did you know of matters relating to Life Esidimeni and ultimately the Marathon Project, which resulted in the deaths of the patients.
Thank you, Justice. Let me start by saying that I became the Premier of Gauteng Province on the 21st of May 2014, after the national and general elections in our country, and subsequently appointed the Executive Council. The matters under consideration at the arbitration process came to my attention through the Premier's Budget Council. And I would assume, if I am right, Justice, that MEC Creecy has canvassed fully what the role of that council is.
Yes, she has.
In December, in November 2014, the Budget Council meeting, which was convened by myself, at which the Department of Health tabled its first presentation in the way our budget process works. And our budget process works essentially on the basis of the technical processes before, which culminate in the Budget Council, with which I chair. Half the time is chaired by me, half the time is chaired by MEC Creecy. The Budget Council seeks to help our provincial treasury to put together a budget, because putting together a budget is one of the executive functions of MEC Creecy from the Public Finance Management Act. She puts together a budget, but she needs to make sure that the entire administration participates in that. The budget is put together on the basis of the priorities of our administration. Every department comes before the Budget Council to present its case, basically, and often that case is about, in addition to this, the things that they have always been done, the basic minimum things they have always been doing. If there is money, and I always ask the question to departments when they come. The departments come there led by the MEC, and I think it's very important. The Budget Council from departments, every delegation from the department is led by the MEC, and in that delegation, there's the HOD. And essentially, it's often the senior management team of the department. And maybe this is an additional point I would like to add. So the MEC comes, explains what they have gone through as the department, and any member of the delegation can present their presentation in there. And it is in there that the department, the issues well canvassed here, especially by MEC Creecy. The department tabled its document, which I know that the arbitration process has had an opportunity to look through that. And the subsequent budget processes, and all of them, I've gone through, all of them kept coming to the same conclusion from particularly all our social departments, to say to them, firstly, we're not budging, we're not cutting budgets, and even if things may become difficult, we must provide core services, basic services. And that's recorded. The PBC at all times, and I am certain that there was no contradiction at any point. At the end, always says, make sure your constitutional functions are not compromised of providing core services. That being the case, and this 2014 budget meeting was followed by several of them coming to the same issues, same conclusion. And I don't have to belay that point, that every time an issue would arise, we would go back to, if you want to reprioritize, it can't be about cutting services. And I have also publicly stated this point during the State of the Province address in 2017, that that's our attitude. The matter of interest to the arbitration process is Life Esidimeni. It is important to understand that the department has always brought to, at the very beginning, that is in 2014, there are contracts that they want to review, that they are reviewing, and they mentioned amongst them in subsequent engagements, Selby Hospital, which is a step-down facility, and Life Esidimeni. There are contracts they want to review so that they can look at how to provide these services in a way consistent with what they think they are now capable of doing. And I want to emphasize that the issue of cost as an overriding issue was never the issue, to the best of my understanding. The department would have made this point that over time they have additional facilities, they have additional beds, they have new hospitals, and Justice, I can say to you that in that reassurance, not only once, a few times, they would have not emphasized cost, that there are contracts that they think they can review because they can provide those services at a high quality level differently. And I want to emphasize that in the Gauteng provincial government, as the Premier, I don't discuss which service provider a department appoints. I discuss the priorities of this administration, its program, through the Executive Council, Lekgotla, followed by the State of the Province address, followed by the budget that says this is where we want to go. Departments go into their own internal processes. They do the contract management. The Premier's office doesn't make decisions on contracts. Of course, let me qualify this, that there are contracts in the Premier's office, that the DG in the office, the DG as the accounting authority, and the senior management team will make those decisions. Having said that, Justice, so the Premier's Budget Council, the PBC's message was not confusing at all. It was clear at all times. Followed by that, in November, on the 5th of November 2015, so apart from the PBC process, so where else did I encounter the issue of these contracts? At the meeting convened by me, attended by MEC Creecy. So what MEC Creecy may have said to you about the meeting with Nehau, she was in that meeting. The former MEC for Health, MEC Matlangu, the HOD then, who has resigned, Dr. Silibano, were then senior officials in my office. Were in that meeting. Nehau wrote a letter. That letter didn't come to me, and I will explain the system in my office when something comes into the office through correspondence that has to do with the department. The first people who are immediately notified is the relevant department. If it is the matter that has to do with the department, it's the relevant department. And subsequent to that, the administration team sent a letter of Nehau to the department, but the union leadership in the province also sent me an SMS asking for an urgent meeting. The letter would have gone into my office, but they sent me an SMS, and I convened the meeting. The meeting was attended by the General Secretary of Nehau, Mr. Soke, and a delegation from the province. In that meeting, they tabled 3 issues in the meeting of the 5th of November. The first issue they tabled was that Selby contract has been terminated and there are workers who have lost their jobs. That's the step-down facility. At that time, it was terminated already, and that they would like to discuss that. The second issue they raised was that they know that Life Esidimeni contract will be terminated from their interaction with the department, and that it is in that meeting that, so not that I didn't know about, and in my State of the Province address I make this point, that there was an intention on the department to review contracts, but it is in that I knew, because they said there is a way they are going to provide these services through internal capacity. In that meeting, it was brought to my attention that, because they were there, that a letter has already been communicated to the union, to Life Esidimeni. It is correct that out of that discussion with the third item the union had put on the table was the future of private health care in Gauteng. Nehau is, I need to declare here justice that Nehau is a union from which I came from. I used to be a Deputy General Secretary of the union, so I also know their own policy positions very well. I must declare that. That it's not like it's discovered somewhere else. I was an Education Secretary of the union. I used to train shop stewards there, and I became the Deputy General Secretary a few years before I became the Premier. So I also know their position, their attitude to the issue of private healthcare institutions and public healthcare institutions. The key thing on that day was they said there's already a contract terminated. There are workers who have lost their jobs. There is another one that is going to be terminated, workers will lose their jobs, but they also want to discuss the issue of policy. And I, at the beginning of the meeting, I gave an opportunity to the MEC to brief us, and the MEC said she has been engaging together with the HOD, the unions, with regard to the intention to insource. And I know that this word insource has been used a few times. The intention to bring into the public sector, because according to her, the department is capable of providing quality services to not only to the mental health care users, but because Selby was a step-down facility, that there's additional capacity. And she said she and the HOD had been engaging with the union, and they basically don't understand also why the union is panicking. They've been engaging.
Premier, from what you have just been testifying on, like you have indicated that the meeting was on the 5th of November 2015.
Yes.
Can you just clarify the point whether, from your evidence, you have mentioned that NIHAU raised concerns that through its interaction with the department, they were informed that the contract was going to be terminated. Can you just clarify if you were fully aware that, in fact, the contract was already terminated at that time?
I did say, Council, that it is only at that point, at the meeting of the 5th, that what I knew was the discussions that the department has brought to those previous meetings to indicate their intentions. But the union made it very stark. I mean, the union put things like that. A decision has already been taken. Life Esidimeni has informed us that the department has actually served them with the letter that the contract, and that's the letter of the 29th of September, or 27th, September. So it is only at that time. The conclusion of the meeting on Selby was an issue that was a done deal already. The department had driven bringing those patients who were in Selby into the establishment, and the only key issue at that time was the remaining ones who are in Life Esidimeni. And the reassurance from the department was that essentially they were saying how the union, this issue of insourcing, and coming from the unions myself, I kept asking the department, does NIHAU know that what you are doing is to bring this service into the public sector and that you have a capacity to provide that service? The department said, yes, we have been. So MEC Creecy is right. That reassurance took place there again, that we have a capacity to provide this service in-house. We will be able to. So the next important thing.
Well, the reassurance was provided by
the MEC and the HOD.
MEC and the HOD.
Yes, they were the most senior officials.
And HOD.
Dr. Silibano.
Dr. Silibano. Thank you.
They were the most senior officials representing the department at that time.
And the assurance was that they would take them to existing provincial facilities.
Yes.
Yes.
And there is an addition, Justice, that in some of those PBC meetings that they were working with the Department of Infrastructure Development to also improve some of their community health centers, that they will be ready. And I want to emphasize, so in the meeting with NIHAU, there was no issue about the NGOs. as it was in the earlier meeting with of the very first meeting in 2014 of November. And I certainly would know that NEAU would have taken a lot of issues with that, apart from the fact that I myself, as I said in the State of the Province address, once the issue of the NGOs came, I would have worried a lot about their capacity versus not compromising service, unless if it was the existing ones which were already providing good quality service. They would have had to reassure me.
Because taking health care, mental health care to NGOs would certainly compromise jobs, wouldn't it?
Yes. Especially if those hospitals were closing down, certainly. So the first primary concern was about the quality continuity, if what you would call business continuity in another language. The quality of service that the department would be able to provide, that reassurance was there. And secondly, in the light that they are going to move this work, the patients, the mental health care users into different institutions, they would definitely need additional staffing. And that's how the issue of the exact number that there's 300 and something, 300 and I don't know, I may not be that accurate, maybe 374 or 377, especially from Life. That's where the issue of this, the possibility of absorbing those workers into the new service that's going to be provided in-house was not unrealistic. The conclusion of the meeting on that issue, I was chairing the meeting, was that the MEC and Dr. Selebano would continue, because they were saying, we have no problem with NEHAU. We don't know, Premier, why you should be coming in. That was also a reassurance to me. We will continue to meet with NEHAU. The issue of which ones we can absorb will also be based on their skills and the requirements in the in-house service that we are going to provide. The conclusion of the meeting was not an instruction. It was they have been working well. That's the assurance they gave to me. They are going to discuss to see. And then the House said they'll provide the full list of those workers, and they are willing to subject them to an assessment of which ones will be able to meet what requirements.
We know now, Premier, excuse me, that none of all that happened.
Certainly, Justice.
The MEC, HOD, head of mental health care, went straight ahead after those assurances. They shut down Life Esidimeni. The workers lost their jobs. They shunted out the patients from there in a massive hurry, yes, and deep inhumanity. So the promises they made to the Premier's Budget Council and subsequently to you and other colleagues in the Executive Council were breached almost immediately after the meeting of the 5th of November.
Yes,
and one
Justice.
would sit and wonder what to make of that.
Yes, Justice. That was not to be the case.
And what would have moved the MEC to go out there and do the direct opposite of in-house institutionalization if there was a distaste for private health care? But that did not happen. People were parceled out to NGOs.
Justice, that's a very important question. I can move to the next timeline where I asked them that question. And that's unfortunately, as an after effect when people have already died. And at that time, we have the health ombuds, who I have a great deal of respect for, Professor Makhura. That's why it was no difficulty for me to accept his report without reservation. I have a great deal of respect for him. That's why he says, so by the 14th of September, I convened a meeting with the MEC, the HOD, and a team that came from the Mental Health Directorate. And this comes, the 14th is important because on the 13th, the MEC answered a question in the legislature. And that's when she said there are 36 mental health care users who have passed on in the NGOs, who have not only passed on, who have passed on in the NGOs. And I convened that meeting the following day. I wasn't in the legislature on the 13th. Justice, I do, amongst the many things I do is an outreach program to go to factories and go to communities as part of solving problems. I was in the factory in the Val, meeting with the private sector, as I always do, and my spokesperson, Pumla, came to me to say there's just been an answer in the legislature. The MEC says that 36 people have died. And I phoned the MEC and said, we meet tomorrow. I want to meet you with your team to explain what has happened with the death. That's the 14th of September. That is now 2016.
And that's 2016.
Yeah, that's as an after effect.
Yeah.
So there were two main questions I asked in the meeting. The first one is the one you have raised. Firstly, I said to them, how many people have died? And secondly, how did they die? It was out of that discussion, it is clear, and this matter is canvassed well by Professor Makhura in his report, that even in that meeting, and I have a report that Justice, should you be interested in that report, I'll give it to you, where they table all the numbers of deaths and they say over time, people have, at this point they also tried to canvass with the health ombuds, and he didn't buy the story, I must say that people have been dying at Life Esidimeni, and the numbers have been huge even there, and this is the quality of service there has not been good. And then the second thing after, so what was...
In fact, Premier, they were saying people die.
Yeah, it was...
They were saying this is natural
normal.
causes, it's normal.
Almost like, yes, normal. There's
people
nothing...
die, and Dr. Manamela came and told us that. People die. MEC Mashango came and told us in evidence in chief, people die in mental health care, almost like it was normal.
Yes, that was normalizing that said situation. So they put together all these numbers. There were also professionals there. I must say that the chairperson of the Mental Health Review Board, Ms. Masondo, was in the meeting. And I think when she came here and said the Premier was in those meetings of the Marathon Project, she was confusing herself or trying to confuse you and mislead people here. That is the meeting of the 14th of September I was in, when I was wanting answers from them. How many people die? How did they die? She was in the meeting. And I can say that she's amongst the people who gave an explanation that we now know that it is not the truth, that they were actually. So in response, because I can't go into the numbers, they were not sure. And that record is there. In response to how did people die, and I say, how do they die in NGOs? If they died in the hospitals and these government facilities, which is where you said when you are moving the services to, we would really be worried that it means the quality of care you promised you could provide in-house, it was not there. But it's worse still, people died in the NGOs that now we know they were not only ready, they were not only unready and ill-equipped, but they were also unlawfully operating. So I asked them that question. And this is where the issue of the Mental Health Care Act implementation comes for the first time. On the 14th of September, they say they were under pressure to implement. Now, there was the story that they were under pressure from Treasury on the budget. And I know in all those meetings and MEC Creecy has canvassed that point. That was not the case. There was another story in that meeting that now they were under pressure from National Health Department to implement what is called deinstitutionalization. So that's when I was asking. But in NGOs, they said, yeah, but the Mental Health Care Act doesn't allow us. We couldn't take people into our health establishments because the people must be, because deinstitutionalized, it will work against deinstitutionalization. And it takes a bit longer to get behind those things and then find out. So they say they were under pressure, and MEC Creecy has made the point correctly that if it was an implementation of a national government policy, all the MECs in Gauteng come back to the Executive Council. If there's a national policy we must implement, which has new cost implications for us.
Premier, is there any way in which you could have monitored the affairs of the Department of Health in order to avert the tragedy from occurring?
Council, may I conclude just one part of my testimony, which is important before I come to that? And to deal with this issue that for the arbitration process is important about, I'll come back to the issue you are raising. Because the deinstitutionalization is one of the 3 reasons that are given. The first one was pressures, budget pressures. The second one was the AG's report. MEC Creecy dealt with the first one, and the second one competently. She didn't quite know much about this one. I would know because out of that interaction, I said, okay, so they are saying they were doing something, so I can understand. But okay, MEC, why didn't you come and report? But out of that meeting, when you say you are implementing national policy and you are under pressure, it's a very important issue. I'm the premier of only a province, so I must check. I subsequently interacted with Minister Mtswaledi, firstly over the phone, and then we subsequently met to establish, firstly, to talk about what has happened regarding death, and he briefed me his immediate interventions. Immediately he heard about death, because me and him heard about death the same day, after the 13th on answer the questions in the legislature. In my discussion with the minister, he briefed me about, the minister was traveling. He has already made interventions just before he left. He briefed me about the appointment of the Ministerial Advisory Council that was intervening to go to the institution. Secondly, the appointment of Professor Makhura as the health ombudsman, who was already there to investigate the matter. I must say that in the meeting, the MEC did say that she had tried to ask Professor Makhura to investigate. She said she had tried, but he was not willing. And she came here, and I have no way of knowing until I spoke to the minister, and the minister said he has already appointed Professor Makhura. So two things were done. And throughout that, I would talk to the minister and are all the urgent interventions, now that we know 36 people have died, what else can we do, Minister? And how do I make sure that the department plays ball in the province, doesn't undermine what the minister was trying to do? And Justice, between that time and December, the minister and I engaged a lot, including meeting a few times, no less than 3 times, but speaking over the phone a lot. And our first primary concern was to say, what can we do to save life now that we know? There's an investigation underway, and the minister said this whole issue of the implementation of the mental health care, actually it is the 2013-2020 strategic plan and policy framework, said the way that the department has gone about it is wrong, but the health ombuds is investigating. We will know the full answers. But he already said the way they've gone about it is wrong. But the health ombuds is investigating it as well. And the health ombuds came out and said, in fact, he uses these words, that they selectively interpreted and misrepresented and contravened that policy framework and strategic plan. Now, in my capacity as I'm not a health care specialist, nor am I a premier who has served as an MEC before, when there's something I don't understand, my second opinion on health policy is always Minister Mtswaledi. I work very closely with him, as I do with many ministers, especially if there's reference to national policy.
At the meeting of the 14th of September, following on the announcement in the legislature, did MEC Mahlangu say why didn't she curb all this? Why didn't he stop all this? Because you are concerned, you wanted to know, how did they die? How did they die and end up in NGOs? What did she say?
Justice, let me add that when I explain this, I know that at all costs I want to say that anyone who does something wrong below me, I'm still fully responsible. But this is what they are explaining. It was not only her, but Dr. Silibano, that the explanation on the NGOs was just the mental health care review, and from there on, from that meeting, I ordered them, it's before I spoke to Minister Mtswaledi, that all the places where there's people are in this place, NGOs, which was not the original idea, let's do something so that there's no more loss of life. At that time, I said, let's do something urgently to make sure that we remove people in inappropriate NGOs. But I hadn't spoken to Minister Mtswaledi yet. And once I spoke to him, I was satisfied there were already interventions. And I didn't want a situation where they work this way and the Minister's Advisory Council works this way. I also from there brought in our DG, Ms. Pindile Valeni, that everything we're going to try and do, we must also coordinate with them. But there was no satisfactory explanation.
From the MEC of Health?
Yes.
And from the HOD, did they say, why did they permit what now clearly is an untenable implementation of the decision to shut down Life Esidimeni?
And I think one of the things that everybody who came here said, either they were steamrolled, they had said many things who came here. In the meeting I had with them, none of them said they are afraid of the MEC. They didn't say that to me. Maybe they couldn't. I do not know. None of them said they were being forced. There was in this arbitration process, there was an attempt to say somewhere else above them, somebody ordered them to do this. There was many effort to try and present it like that. But I met with them and asked the questions the country and the families are asking today. Except that the only one I couldn't answer was on the policy and the deinstitutionalization, which was under investigation. So if there was no question about is this deinstitutionalization the way to go, or is it really being carried? If I wasn't awaiting the investigation of the health ombuds on that issue of the deinstitutionalization, I would probably have acted more drastically immediately. But now that there was an investigation, and then there was a question mark about, is there a basis about maybe were they implementing some policy of government where and Minister Mtswaledi will canvass this matter better here.
You know, the MEC came here, to all and sundry listening, said that HOD Dr. Silebano and head of Mental Health Directorate, Dr. Manamela, lied to her. They gave her false report. They gave her assurances that the transfers were being done lawfully, humanely, and no lives would be risked. Did she give you that explanation?
Because I was, Justice, I was asking these questions in the presence of all of them. They were sitting in the room, and maybe fortunately, there's no one who could blame the other, because they are all sitting there. The MEC, the HOD, Dr. Manamela, I can say all of them who were part of this marathon project as defined, this disastrous and catastrophic project. They were all sitting there. None of them said to me that there is anything. So there was no issue about being misled there. There was no issue about being afraid there. And I'm not saying that there may have been people who were not afraid, but I was not overseas.
You see, the importance of what I'm asking is this. There was the first opportunity for them to explain to the head of government in province what happened.
Yes.
And I'm trying to tie that with the explanations they gave before the arbitration.
Yes.
That would have been the first moment to tell the truth, isn't it?
Yes, certainly.
Council, any further questions, the Premier?
Premier, if you can return to the question that I had posed earlier on, relating to your ability or inability to have intervened in matters within a department. I say so in relation to your powers, with reference to the powers of the MEC and various heads of departments.
Council, let me return to the point that I'm very conscientious about the obligation I have as the head of government, that when something goes wrong in the government I lead, in the end, and ultimately, I am responsible. I'm very conscientious about that. And for that matter, all the interactions with Minister Mtswaledi, once things went wrong, I knew that my head is also on the block. I knew that. And Justice, my head, when your head is on the block, when you know why it must be on the block, you do so peacefully. I was not being forced to understand that people have died under the care of my provincial government. I must do everything at that time to clear anything, reduce the risk of those who are there. And once I've already explained that there were processes the minister has put in place. And I think I would like to say that there are also things that with hindsight, and I now know that there were also efforts by civil society groups that were very involved in this process to also try and reach my office. And I'm saying I now know that letters would have been written and that the process in my office, which has now changed totally, that when these letters come, they get taken to engage with the relevant department by my service delivery intervention team, hoping that this department is well-meaning, will respond to the issues in a well-meaning way, and that the letters would include the letter written by students, which only came to my attention in January, when the students had written, in January 2017, when the students would have written the letter before. And part of why I also take responsibility required of this office is that, yes, I could have, knowing what I know, I could have intervened, including even on the Life Esidimeni contract. Although I don't make decisions on contracts, but when the consequences may be disastrous. So I want to say to the families today, when you are a head of government, there's nothing that you can say you can't do as long as it is lawful. It's permissible in law.
Yes, because the noise, Premier, I'm sure all counsel will put it to you very shortly once the cross-examination starts.
Yes.
There was a family committee. They made representations to the MEC, to the HOD, submitted memoranda, and marched on headquarters of health.
Yes.
They appeared on television and in newspapers. There were professional bodies that wrote letters back. You know the evidence. You've had most of it.
Yes. I now know.
And was
Justice.
it all that quiet? Nothing reached your office? Because it was a lot of resistance that you know now, I know now, everybody knows. None of that alerted you to say, I ought to intervene.
Justice, the letters that came to my office, and I need to at this point to also say that there was a process that was believed would lead to some amicable solution that my office was aware of, a facilitated process by the national DG Matsuso to try, my office was aware as they were receiving that process would lead to some amicable solution that would have been announced publicly, and I myself did not familiarize myself with it, except that I knew later that it promised a lot of hope, but later was not honored and unfortunately by my Department of Health, it was not honored, that process. And there was a period where those in my office who were dealing with this matter thought, no, there is a solution. The parties are meeting. There is the national DG is facilitating an amicable resolution of the matter, and that was abandoned. When I keep asking why did this matter not? Why was there no alarm, SOS, red alert? It is that process that was being spearheaded by DG Matsuso with the hope that there will be agreement reached between, especially Section 27, as one of the civil society groups that was representing some of the family members working with the committee. And that's why I say to you, because with the powers I have, even though I can't appoint service providers and I can't terminate contracts, not even in my office, I can just terminate, unless if there's corruption, I must investigate and order that if the findings say it was irregular, but I can't. But I could have done something, and this lives with my conscience today, because as the head of government, I could have done something to be more responsive and bring the NGOs around the table with the department to try and get an understanding to be reached, as I did with the union and the department. But I want to say that is not, I don't want to excuse myself from the obligation and the responsibility. DG Matsuso tried it, it didn't work.
Okay, Premier, any further questions in chief?
Indeed, so, Justice. Premier, you have given us the timeline of your engagement on the matter relating to Life Esidimeni. I just want to find out if, was there any member of either Section 27 or any other civil society which made contact with you about issues relating to Life Esidimeni?
Council, firstly, I've explained the communication system in my office. The only time I had direct contact with someone representing those who were really trying to avert the disaster, who worked so hard to avert the disaster that happened, was after the fact, and it was with Mark Haywood from Section 27. Mark and I know each other from we work with civil society on issues of xenophobia in the province and various initiatives. And Mark said to me, Premier, I was trying to reach you during this period because, you know, you and I know each other, to help us because there were lots of toxic relations and we knew that the department was not willing to listen to us. And I said, Mark, how did you try to reach me? He said, through your office. And I said to Mark, you have my cell number? He said, I don't have. And I said to Mark, one of the tragedies of bureaucratic systems is that you can't find me when you represent such an important sector of civil society. And Mark and I exchanged numbers from there on. I said to Mark, and that was after facts. That's when, and this was essentially not only, it was when I think when the report was already released, and I said, if there's a problem, Mark, don't only talk to the people, call me. I can say justice that it is not only Mark that I say, leaders who represent I say, this is my number. I know if you're sending communication, you will go through the office, but please contact me directly. This is not disregard for internal processes. So it is Mark Haywood, and from there on, whenever there are issues, Mark calls, whether it's on education, Mark calls me, we have a problem with your department on this. Can we either meet or can you do this? I want, so that's the only contact, Justice, I had. I am aware that there is a letter that says on behalf of Mark that Mark was in contact with me, but Mark and I would have the same. Our communication directly was only at that time, after.
Yes, there are going to be several questions on that. I'm sure Council are waiting to draw your attention to attempts to avert the tragedy.
Yes.
And the attempts were many. They were varied. There were different classes and kinds. But I won't go there now. Council, do you have any further questions?
Indeed, Justice. Premier, you have already alluded of the interventions taken by the National Director for Health. I just want to ask a question in relation to court proceedings which were instituted against your office as well as the department. It is on record that those court cases were indeed instituted. I just want to quiz you on your knowledge of those proceedings having been instituted.
Justice, you know, one of the things I found out when I became the Premier of Gauteng in May 2014 is that there's a tendency for departments to cite the Premier's office in court papers without bringing these documents to the Premier's office. It was very rife. And one of the cases that the judgment is on today is a case in point, where, and I went back to the Executive Council, together with the DG, put in place a system that no government department in Gauteng must go to court, even on issues that they have executive authority on in line with the Constitution, for example, education, health, must go to court without informing me, not just delivering court papers to the Premier's office. I don't want to see a member of my Executive Council in court on a matter they have not discussed. I've put that to a stop, but it was a very normal abnormality, regular practice that was occurring in the province. I don't know where else in government this happens, where, and the Premier's office legal team has presented us with a signed affidavit that actually the court papers were not delivered to my office when the Department of Health went to court with us on this issue. And as I say, it's a matter we have now put to a stop. But knowing how government works now, even if you have put something to a stop, you must monitor it.
Yes. Any more questions?
Can you just clarify this point, that prior to the 13th of September 2016, did you know of the marathon project, which resulted in the transfer of patients en masse to the various NGOs?
Justice, I think I have canvassed that point adequately about the marathon project as defined by the health ombuds. is the transfer of people to NGOs.
Yes.
These NGOs that are unlawful. I have canvassed this point, Council, adequately that it is on the 14th of September 2016 when I was seeking answers that prior to that, no.
You have also alluded to the fact that post the announcement by the former MEC, you had various interaction with the National Minister of Health with regard to the interventions which were taken in order to deal with the situation.
Yes.
Pursuant to the further recommendations by the Ombud, were you satisfied that the government was being responsive to this touchy issue of people having lost their lives?
Council, through you, Justice, when people have lost their lives and you are coming when they have lost your lives, you can't regard yourself as responsive. You are reactive. And I am very conscious that we came too late. And this is one of the things, when we had the prayer service at the SABC with not all members of the families, it's one of the things that I apologized for amongst the many things, and we came too late. Once the report was concluded by, and I must say that the matter of this report, investigation by Professor Makhura, was of great interest to me about the exact circumstances. And once that report was finalized, and my last meeting with Minister Mzwaledi was just before Christmas. Again, it was just to check when the report will be ready. And
that's December 2016.
December 2016, the minister and I were working feverishly on one hand, and on the other hand, I was just making sure that the department cooperates with that process, and there is nothing that happens which we don't know. And it is a matter of fact now that the report, the health ombuds did a great job, but that report was released later in January. I got it on the interim report on the 11th of January. I got the interim report on the 11th of January, which really revealed in a very devastating way what the families have gone through.
Why did the MEC resign?
Once I got the interim report, Justice, I met with the MEC to say that, did you get the report? She said she did, and she's given a chance to respond. She's got bereavement in the family. And I said, this report is very, very serious. It's not just that the number of people who died now, but the circumstances under which they died. And what we as the provincial government did to contribute to cause this death. And I impressed upon her that because she must respond as a matter of procedure, that this report is very, very serious. And depending on what the final report would be, based on her submission, I am going to take very drastic action about it. I made it clear. She was basically having a bereavement. It is a matter of fact in that period, and that's why there was a delay. I think from there on, I was also in contact with Professor Makhura a few times. Once he sent to me the interim report, I was able to, from time to time, check with him, and he said to me, look, there's nothing I can do. And I was, when is the report being released? He said, there's nothing I can do. The MEC has asked for more time. I must give her more time on that. And it's also a matter of fact, I got the report, the final report now on the 31st of January. Final report. I had studied that report and all its full implications. And then after that, I must say, even prior to, the MEC did say, as I was saying, this report is very serious, and
but
I am going to take.
Also then, I'm sorry
by
to
that,
you.
yes,
Yeah.
she had seen the interim report when I interacted with her, and she said, "Well, Premier, if you know, I'm going to make my representation." She made it clear to me she disagrees with the report, and I said, "I don't know what." Disagreeing with the report means, but what the health ombudsman says here is very, very serious.
And was she pushed or did she jump?
I know this is a question that has also come here. I want to say first that I did say to her, MEC, this is very serious. Firstly, you know, it's not something I've said once. In my executive council, and in this province of Gauteng, even in the party I belong to, the ANC, we in Gauteng province, even in the most difficult times, we have always said when something goes wrong in your line of duty, you must take responsibility, and that there will be consequences. And she said, Premier, I will make my submission. If I have to resign, I will do so. And I was making it very, very clear to her that she should go that way, or I will take a different decision if she's not convinced. That her disagreement with the report, she must make a representation. And then, should I say, fortunately, she said to me that, no, Premier, I will resign if you want me to resign.
Sure. And in all fairness to her, I can't recall any political principal who has resigned.
Not in the Republic.
In the Republic. For mismanagement or for improper conduct, I'm trying to think. Your memory might be better than mine.
Let me say, okay, Justice in Gauteng province, in the ANC government here, and when I'm not boasting about it, it's just a fact. I used to be the secretary of the ANC in the province, that we have been dealing with. There are several MECs who have resigned when things went wrong. Without boasting, I have the honor to have been one of the people who had to talk to them. Former MEC Bob Mabaso, in the period when Premier Mbazi Mashilowa was the Premier, had to resign. And the second one was former MEC Humphrey Memezi, in the period when Premier Nomvula Mukonyane was the Premier, had to resign. And in a sense, I think I was wrong, Justice, that she was the first. What I can take away from her is that it didn't take a lot of persuasion. I think she said to me, Premier, if you think I must resign, I will do so. And at the time, it was something I understood very well, in line with what the ANC has also taken certain resolutions about this matter. When something goes wrong in your line of duty, you must consider that.
Well, you've claimed it for the Gauteng province. I wonder whether you can claim it for any other government.
Justice,
you see, it's important.
What saddens me.
Yes, it's not a light matter, as you know, Premier.
It is.
The importance of it is creating a culture of accountability.
Yes.
Amongst those who wield public power. because public power is given only to do good,
Yes.
never given to do bad.
Yes.
And when one has acted unlawfully or blatantly unethically and is a public
Yes.
official, one of the ways is to fall on your sword, is to go away,
Yes.
because you don't deserve to wield that public power.
Yes. Yes, Justice, and I agree with you. If I could say that that exercise of ethical considerations is my religion, if I could say it is the religion that I learned in this province of the ANC, that is important. And I think one of the things that saddens me, looking at the families here, it's passing the buck. Everybody trying to say, what is called an exercise in self-preservation. And I hope what I'm saying is not an exercise in self-preservation, because I don't want to pass the buck. Where everybody says, no, they were not there, actually. Even those who were at the head table, when people died and when they were transported to illegal, everybody says they were not there. That's to evade accountability that way shouldn't be acceptable in our democracy.
Thank you. I would invite Council to continue with questions in chief.
Thank you, Justice.
Our time is running out, as you can see.
Premier, I'm going to allow the families, through their legal representatives, to ask matters which are of their concern, and it will be on that note that I'll end my examination in chief. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Council. To the rest of Council, what do you want to do? Yes, it is 5:30. But the day is still very young.
Justice, for my part, we're prepared to continue until such time as is necessary.
Yes. Council, you and Mr. Skibi, are you still here? Do you have the energy to continue?
Justice, my learned friend will cross-examine and he's prepared to continue.
He's prepared to continue. He's all revved up and ready to go.
Yes, Justice.
Very well. Advocate Groenewald?
Ready to continue. Thank you,
Yes,
Justice.
I think we should. We should try and wrap this up by tomorrow. So I think we should continue. Advocate Hassan?
Thank you, Justice. Good afternoon, Premier. My name is Adila Hassam, and I appear with my colleague, Ms. Steyn, and we represent the families of the deceased. I'd like to thank you for making yourself available to testify before these proceedings and to answer the questions. Families have had many questions throughout the proceedings. I'm also going to take it that you are familiar with most of the facts.
Yes.
If I refer to something that I haven't put to you, you may say so.
Yes.
Just in the interest of time.
Yes.
I'd like to begin with, in 2015, with the litigation that was brought by the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, the South African Society of Psychiatrists, the South African Federation of Mental Health, and the Association of Concerned Families against the department. A lot had happened by December 2015. Many warnings had been made to the department by experts, including the parties to this litigation. But by December 2015, those engagements proved fruitless, and it was necessary to seek the intervention of the courts to protect rights of the mental health care users. And I'd like to refer you to an aspect of the record, which is a letter to your office in December, on 14 December 2015. There are a number of files next to you, and if someone could assist you to locate...
Somebody will bring it to you, Premier. It will be brought there.
File 4. And it's page 1406.
Yes.
And it's a letter, it's an email from Ms. Umunyana Rujeje of Section 27, who is one of the attorneys representing the families.
Purpose, is it file 4, Council?
It is, Justice Makhura.
And then the number is
1406.
Yeah, my 1406 is... Oh, I see, I've got it. It's an email.
It's an email. The subject matter is closure of Life Esidimeni.
Thank you, I've got it.
It's dated 14 December 2015. The signatory is Ms. Umunyana Rujeje, attorney for Section 27, and she addresses it to you, the email to you, and it says, "Dear Honourable Premier, Mark Hayward has been in touch with you about the closure of Life Esidimeni and the concerns about the patients who are currently residing in the 5 facilities. We wanted to give you an update regarding our engagement with the Gauteng Department of Health. Please see attached correspondence for your information. Our clients," and she lists the clients, are also attempted to engage with the Gauteng Department of Health in the last few weeks and will continue to do so. Yours sincerely. And the 2 letters were letters in which the concerns were detailed. So the concerns are not detailed in this email, but the attached letters detail the concerns. The letter was sent to several people in your office. Did you not receive this letter?
No.
And why would you not have received it? Well, let me ask you this. Are the people to whom it's addressed, am I correct to say that there are people in your office?
Yes.
Why would they have not brought this to your attention?
Counsel, in my earlier testimony, I explained that there is a system. Let me first start with the mention of Mark Haywood being in touch with me. I have already explained that Mark and I have known each other before, and that the only direct contact with me, in touch, if it means direct contact, is when this has already happened. But the letter did indeed go to my office, and my office has been able to demonstrate that as the system that I was explaining earlier on, they brought this to the attention of the Department of Health, and it is quite clear to me that at that time it was a belligerent party to this process.
That the Department of Health was belligerent.
Yes, would have not helped. This is now what I know. Would have not helped, given the experience of an attempt by the National DG to negotiate a settlement, and I'm saying this is something that I really know now, that they wouldn't cooperate because they were made up.
So I hear what you're saying is that the system would have kicked in and it would have been sent to the Gauteng department, but this email says we've already been in touch with the Gauteng department and there have already been attempts to engage, and now that they're seeking to meet with you. So It's not an ordinary letter bringing something to attention.
I accept, Council.
So you accept that it should have been brought to your attention?
Yes.
And if a letter were now written to you, would it be brought to your attention regardless of whether there's another line department involved?
I have changed the system with the DG Matsuso on this immediately after this, and that all letters depend. If it's administrative issue, it wouldn't be all letters from organizations, especially that are making representation, complaining about a department of my government. I also get copies of those letters. There will still be action by the service delivery team, but I now know that it is not enough that there may be action at another level that I must involve myself. In fact, I do also receive those letters directly now.
DG Matsotso, I got a little lost there.
Oh no, DG Baleni. I'm sorry, DG Baleni. DG Matsuso is the National Health DG.
You see,
I'm sorry.
I'm here and awake. I'm listening to you.
Yes. Justice, thank you.
You see, Premier, the importance of this email is also is that it attached the letters which more fully explain the need and the importance and the urgency, including the letter of 9 December 2015, which was a very long letter setting out all of the concerns and threatening litigation.
Yes.
And this was a final attempt to avert litigation by approaching you. And what's also important is that the letter, even though resort was finally made to threaten litigation, what's important about the letter is it says, let's go together to court.
Yes.
Let us jointly approach a court. Why? Because what really matters is the rights and interests of the mental health care users. So let's jointly go to a court and ask the court to appoint a curator to look after the rights of the mental health care users. And you were not aware of that, you say, until sometime later.
Regrettably, yes. And I am quite, I'm deeply saddened by this and very embarrassed.
Because you see, in our democratic system, Premier, I'm repeating what you know very well, and I know you do preach that from time to time. Citizens should be able to kick up any concern.
Yes.
In other words, from the bottom, you should be able to tell your ward councillor and move on to councillor, move on to mayor, premier, president. The whole system is meant to be responsive to our people.
Yes.
And systems should be aligned to that, so that juniors don't kick around letters to some safe zones. And sadly, it happened here.
Yes.
And had you received the letter in time, what would you have done?
My natural inclination when you have something like this would have been to call a meeting with the department and those who have written a letter to me to try and facilitate a solution, an amicable solution on the matter, depending on the nature of the issues. That's my natural inclination. I don't treat civil society organizations as a nuisance. I think they add a great deal of value to our democracy.
And after this letter was sent and there was no response, court papers were filed, and there was a notice of intention to oppose that was filed by the department, but also on your behalf. And if you wish to we can go there. It is in file 1, page 398. It's a notice of intention to oppose that's signed by attorneys for it says that they call themselves an attorney for the department and the Premier.
I'm sorry, what page?
What page? It's page 398. Do you see it's a notice of intention to oppose?
Yes.
And if you see under the signature of the attorneys, it says first, second, and fourth respondents' attorneys. First, second, and fourth respondents. The first respondent was the MEC. The second respondent was the HOD, the head of department. And the fourth respondent was yourself.
Yes.
And the obvious effect of this is to say that they have instructions to oppose the litigation, including on your behalf.
Yes.
Were you aware that you were opposing this litigation?
Certainly checked with the DG in my office, DG Baleni. The office was not notified of this. Not only were I not notified, but the office was not notified of this.
Is it customary for a department in the Gauteng Provincial Department to instruct private attorneys to oppose litigation on behalf of the Premier?
It is a disease I've just been trying to cure, as I said, Justice. It's very common, at least when I came in, until I went to the Executive Council and said, we must take a cabinet decision. No one can act on my behalf, go to court as an MEC or a department without me knowing, or even act on behalf of the provincial government without me knowing. It was happening quite a lot.
Particularly in the context where a threat to constitutional rights is being asserted.
Yes.
The Premier is cited. It's an expectation of the parties, and indeed it's the expectation of the courts that the Premier would be aware of the litigation if cited, and certainly if there's a notice of intention to oppose, that the Premier is aware of it.
So this is misrepresentation of the Premier in court.
And who misrepresented the Premier?
I can only say is the Department of Health. I can't think of anybody else, because they were the ones who were taking up this matter. Or am I wrong, Justice?
No.
No.
No, I don't know. I'm interested to know how that would happen, because it is not appropriate. It would not be appropriate in government, I would think, for an attorney to make a decision on opposing litigation in a matter involving fundamental rights without taking an instruction from the political principal.
I agree.
Council, in my time, Council, it was necessary to file a power of attorney.
Quite
Is that
so.
still being done?
Quite so. Often not.
I mean, if you claim to act for a party, the attorneys have to file a power of attorney. Certainly in actions, I know it's still a requirement. In motion proceedings, is it required that you file a power of attorney authorizing you to act on behalf of the party?
The practice now is not to do so, but if you are called upon to show your power of attorney, you're required to do so.
Because I'm thinking, here's an attorney who comes before court and says, I act on behalf of a party, not just a party, head of government, And in truth and in fact, it is not so, we are now told.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what would be the consequences of that.
Well, that was my next question.
Oh, very well. You go there.
I don't know whether it would suit. I'm not sure what the question is. Sorry.
Sorry, Justice, to intervene. I will suggest that my learned colleague move to the next question. Not only has the Premier answered the question relating to his lack of knowledge of the litigation, there is also an affidavit which has been deposed and which forms part of these proceedings, dealing with the notice of intention to defend, which was entered on behalf of the Premier.
Where do we find the affidavit? Was it already been handed in?
It is part of the ELA exhibits.
ELA how much?
Subject to correction, it should be ELA 9. It is one of the aspects which were dealt with at the very beginning of these proceedings relating to 9.
Well, let's get to it, Council, without generating much. Let's find ELA 9 and...
It's not ELA 9, Justice.
Well, say the matter has been settled by an affidavit.
Yes, as I've said...
Just refer us to the number or find it when you have it. Let us know.
Sorry, I'm not sure what the meaning of saying the matter has been settled by the way of the affidavit. What is obvious and what's undisputed on the record is that there's a notice of intention to oppose that has been signed by the attorneys on behalf of the Premier.
Well, let's understand the response is that there is an affidavit, we just hand it up, in which the office of the Premier confirmed under oath that these proceedings had not reached his attention. So I'm saying, show us the affidavit, we'll have a look at it.
Fair enough. My question, it goes beyond that point,
yes,
though,
yes.
about whether it came to the attention of the Premier. I accept the Premier is testifying on oath now, and I accept when you say it wasn't brought to your attention, and we've dealt with the problem with of it not having been brought to your attention.
Justice, if I can just read it for the record.
Before you read it, just give us the annexure, the ELA number.
I apologize for the incorrect numbering. It is in fact ELA 22.
ELA 22. Very well.
As I have said, Justice, the Premier has dealt with the question relating to his knowledge of the litigation. And in addition to that, the affidavit has been filed to prove that the litigation was never brought to his attention.
Who deposed the affidavit?
The affidavit was deposed to Geert Hendrik Kate. If I can just read it for the record, I am an adult male duly appointed in terms of the Public Service Act as the Chief Director, State Law Advisory Services in the Office of the Premier. As such, I am the head of the legal unit in the Office of the Premier. I'm going to skip paragraph 2 and go to paragraph 3 of the affidavit, which reads that the legal unit in the Office of the Premier did not instruct Mcebesha Madlanga attorneys to act on behalf of the fourth respondent, in brackets, Premier of Gauteng, close brackets, nor did the legal unit instruct the attorneys to oppose the application on behalf of the fourth respondent under case number 2015/44348 in the South Gauteng High Court matter of the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, the Association of Concerned Families of the Residents of Life Esidimeni, the South African Federation of Mental Health, and the South African Society of Psychiatrists versus the Minister of the Executive Council for Health, the head of the Department of Health Gauteng, Life Esidimeni Pty Ltd, the Premier of Gauteng, and the Minister of Health. The affidavit was deposed to on the 13th of October, 2017.
Thank you. That helps. Thank you. Council.
Justice, with respect, we've moved off that point. I was entitled to ask the Premier from his own words to understand what happened. We've moved off the point now. We've accepted that it wasn't brought to the attention of the Premier.
Yes.
My question, if I may then move on, Premier, is once it came to your attention that the department and the attorneys had made a decision without an instruction from you, what steps did you take against either the department, against one, the department, and two, the attorneys?
I asked, I basically instructed the DG in the Office of the Premier to ensure that we take appropriate steps, whatever steps are necessary legally, to ensure that no one acts on our behalf and get away with it or misrepresent the facts. And I've already said, Ms. Hassim, that I also made sure through the Executive Council that every MEC and HOD knows they can't act on our behalf or claim to act on our behalf without, or even go to court and cite us, or even if they don't cite us on the issues they have executive authority on in line with Section 132 and 33, even on those issues where they are not citing us, that the MECs must phone me at least. If other processes are too long, phone me and say, Premier, we are going to court on this matter.
Did you instruct that any action should be taken or complaint laid against the attorneys purporting to represent you?
Ms. Hassim, I will check the specific, I think what I said to the DG is what is it we can do with such lawyers? And I am not able to say to you at the moment what action has been taken, but I have been upset a few times, Justice, by this issue of what I would call, with a great deal of respect to lawyers, rogue lawyers who act on our behalf without getting the instruction to do so.
Which was the law firm again, remind me?
Gobecha Madlanga, Incorporated. Justice, the same, one of the law firms that received 300,000 rand a day, according to what we saw from the annual statements.
Oh, that's those are the guys.
It's the same law firm. So the litigation ensues but settles, and you've already said that you were aware that there had been an agreement between the parties, and then you subsequently became aware that that agreement had been dishonored by the department. When did you become aware of serious concerns about the threat to mental health care users?
As I said, Ms. Hassim, it was too late already.
In September 2016?
Yes, that there have been a lot of effort to try to press the button, the red alert, and also efforts to try and mediate, which all did not yield any positive results.
See, by the time September 2016 came around and the MEC answered the parliamentary questions, 85 people had died. Even though the former MEC had reported 36, we now know through the Ombuds findings that it was 85. There had been a lot of media attention.
Not 77?
Not by my calculation, according to LR 57 of the Ombuds report. But it's neither here nor there. My point is that it was much higher than 36, much higher.
Yes,
And there had been many marches, there were marches and protests and media coverage prior to September 2016. Were you aware of those protests and the marches to the department and to the MEC's office, the media checkpoint and those things?
Ms. Hassim, I've already, in response to Justice, the question Justice posed about everything, I've already said I regret that I was not aware. And I know this is not good for anybody in position of leadership to say I was not aware. It's not good. It is not an acceptable excuse. It is, and it may be difficult for the families to believe it. I have interacted with them a lot of times, and I understand, given what has happened and what was there around. So I have answered that question.
Yeah, I'm not going to take that question any further. Thank you. I accept your answer. The Ombuds report then, the Ombud began investigation, and we know what the findings were, and it's resulted in the resignation of the former MEC. And the former MEC has testified that she did so because she took political responsibility. That is why she resigned. I'd like to know from you whether you think that the resignation is sufficient for the purposes of accountability.
Ms. Hassim, I think I've already explained that I think our system of government will work better if everybody are held to account and they take responsibility. And I want to say, even where maybe you were not directly involved, so when I had a discussion with her, and then she said to me, Premier, if you think I should resign, I will do so. I didn't have to fire her. Your question is resigning enough? And that question can only be answered when the full facts are on the table. When we know what we now know. And at that point, we didn't know as much as we do. And often, I often say that I think resigning shouldn't lead people to think that it is done. I've resigned, so what else do you want? Why do you keep asking me questions? Mm-hmm. I think if that's what anyone would think when they hold a position of authority, maybe even whether in the public or in the private sector, I would call evading responsibility. So knowing if there are issues that the MEC should still be held accountable or whatever comes out of this process, that really depends on what comes out of here and what facts are on the table. And I often say that to my MECs that there are actions you must take and there are others who will take other actions. It doesn't mean if you take that action that there will be no others who think that we must go beyond that. So I would like to leave it there, leave it to this process.
That is helpful, MEC, but of course, we've allowed you to answer questions quite long because of your seniority and your importance in the accountability, in the state structure. But if we are not to sleep here, I'm going to urge you to keep it a little tighter, sir.
Thank you. I thought I was going to be very short today.
Yes.
I apologize if I was too long.
No, not at all. But ultimately, we'll have to leave here. So I'm just urging you very respectfully to keep them tight so that we can cover some ground. Thank you.
The arbitration has cast quite a bit of light on the systemic weaknesses in the Gauteng Department of Health. What steps are you taking to address those systemic issues when it comes to financial management, accountability, and also the culture of fear that was spoken about by the Ombud?
It is true that one of the key issues that comes out of the Health Ombuds report is the systemic issues. And some of those systemic issues are being dealt with by our provincial treasury, a culture of not adhering to the budget. Many of them are being dealt with by MEC Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa, the new MEC for Health, to turn around the culture of the institution, including basically performance issues. And I must say that, Ms. Hassim, that in my 4 years, close to 4 years as the Premier, through you, Justice, I have met lots of health workers in Gauteng province, if you like, what we call on the ground, in the institutions who are very committed, but the organization is very sick. And because if it wasn't, the problem is not only with the mental health directorate, which has put people through what they have been, but the organization is very sick. So MEC Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa is leading that initiative. I have, in addition to fixing that, appointed an intervention team. It's a cabinet committee, plus a team of experts now working with MEC Ramokgopa and Dr. Aaron Mtswaledi, the minister. We together put together a team of experts to help cure the department responsible for keeping our people alive, basically, because that department is sick in many ways. So I agree with you, it's very deep, institutional. And some of the issues get brought to my attention by civil society people who are working in this area of health also will form part of what we will do together.
Going forward.
Yes.
We also heard from the former MEC Mahlangu that decisions were collective. All the decisions that were taken were collective. What does that mean for individual accountability, and who do you think ought to be held accountable for the decision?
Well, Ms. Hassim, I thought that I have sufficiently canvassed this question at the beginning, but let me restate that the Constitution of the Republic does talk about collective and individual accountability amongst members of the Executive Council. So there is no way you can leave out individual accountability. In this particular case, because what went profoundly wrong is in the Department of Health, it is an expectation from me, something that it is a practice in our executive, that when something goes profoundly wrong in your line of duty, you take individual accountability. In the end, that individual accountability also means that me, as the head of government in the province, I can't end there. I must say, I must be able to account what is it that I did to either try and prevent the disaster, whether it's in a school, in education, or in any sector of government in the province. Something that goes wrong there, the first line of accountability is the executive authority responsible, and then there's an accounting officer. But it keeps coming back to me as well. And I have to demonstrate that what I did to try and fix. And in this particular case, I'll probably demonstrate that more than just what happened before, the work I have done with Minister Mtswaledi and MEC Ramokgopa to implement the report of the Health Ombuds without any reservation, to try and correct. It's not yet complete. That's why we are here.
Thank you, Premier. The former MEC also testified that when she is cited in litigation, that it doesn't mean that she reads the court papers, and she doesn't. It's not required to read the court papers. You've already said what your view is when it comes to you. You would agree that the MEC is under an obligation to familiarize herself with litigation in which she's cited?
How the briefings get done, Justice, is a different thing altogether. The DG in the Office of the Premier briefs me about the issues that are under my purview. I may not read the full court documents, but if we are cited and it is brought to our attention, the DG comes to brief me. Premier, we have this case. So how reading or
yes,
not reading
that's
is
not the thrust
issue.
of the question. The question is more about, it is an obligation on the MEC to know about the litigation and to give an instruction.
Yes.
An informed instruction.
I agree with you.
The MEC also testified that at the crucial time when patients were being parceled out...
The former MEC.
The former MEC, my apologies. The former MEC testified that at that time, critical period when patients were being parceled out to NGOs, that she was campaigning for local government elections for a period of 3 months. Is it permissible for a highly paid senior public official to take time out to do political campaigning?
Ms. Hassim, I will explain what I did in the midst of an election campaign, and my diary will demonstrate that I do lots of work. I go to communities, I go to meet with sectors to solve the problems, whether it's in the economy or community-related problem. In the midst of an election campaign, and the one in 2016 is the one in point, and that I know when I will do my campaign work, but my government obligations can never be compromised, because in a way, what is political campaigning if you are not providing the basic services that people want from their government? What is campaigning about? So it is illogical to me that you can use that as an explanation to evade accountability. I can provide my diary. You will see their meetings I attended, but you'll see how much government work in 2016 I was doing. And even when I was not, I was overseas on foreign missions to go and mobilize investments. So I'm saying, and I think politicians who think that stop do government work and go and campaign, I don't understand that type of campaign. Because you must do your work. And if people are happy, they will be happy with your work. That's my school of thought.
Thank you. I'm sorry to have to bring you back to this, but in the process of the exchange around what was happening in the December 2015 litigation and what you knew, I omitted to put something to you. So I need to return to that about whether you knew about the project and the timelines and the NGOs. And that's because, and let me take you to so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. It's in file 2. And it's at page 621.
Again, do I have file 2?
No. This is file
1. Does the Premier have file 2?
It would appear not.
No. No, Justice.
So it's page 621. That's the document I want to turn to. It's the minutes of a meeting between Gauteng Department and stakeholders. It's dated 6 January 2016. And the relevant part of these minutes for the purpose of my question is at page 625. And it's the second bullet point. And it says, Dr. Lebete noted concerns that were raised by stakeholders, but stressed that the department had a mandate from the Premier, MEC, and stakeholders to deliver on the project and on time. What do you say to that?
I am aware of this, and all I can say is that maybe there may have been those who believed the Premier was aware. I mean, not I was aware, but maybe somebody was using my name. But I basically say there's no truth to this, as I've already demonstrated.
You're saying your name was being used, yeah?
I'm saying
is untrue.
Yes, it's totally untrue. And my own sense is that it is possible that people want to move things by name dropping. This was brought to my attention quite recently that this is the case.
Thank you. With regard to the staff, you spoke about the meeting you had on 5 November 2015 with the union, and the discussion was about the absorption of about 370 of the staff of Life Esidimeni into the department. Am I capturing it correctly?
Selby, remember I said there were three items. Selby retrenched. Life Esidimeni anticipated retrenchment, and then the private hospitals.
So was the 370 not all Life Esidimeni staff?
It is possible that there were two different numbers for, in fact, there was a number for Selby and a number for Life Esidimeni, yes. In fact, there are two numbers.
Do you remember what the number was for Life Esidimeni?
I will be able to provide, to furnish you justice with the exact number.
Do you have a number you want to put to the Premier?
Well, the only number I have is the number that was referred to by MEC Creecy, which was in the same region of 360 or 370.
70, yeah.
But what we do know is that according to Mr. Masanochi's evidence, was that there were about 700 healthcare workers that were employed at the Esidimeni facilities. And there were hundreds more staff that were employed in non-health provision services, so cleaners and gardeners and security guards. And we don't know what has happened to them, isn't that so?
Yes. And I think we don't know what has happened to all of them. And the basic thing is that just reporting back on that issue, I left that matter in the capable hands at the time of both the MEC and HOD and the union representatives who said they don't need me. They were already talking to resolve the issues.
And now we know that it was a big, big scheme and hoax because those workers lost their jobs. And only a few of them were reabsorbed into existing provincial hospitals. So whether they were groundspeople, workers in a variety of categories, that is non-medical, and those who were medically trained, many lost their jobs. And they didn't come back to you, did they? To say, in fact, despite the intervention of Nehao, who we know now were very unhappy from the evidence before us, jobs were lost.
Justice, they didn't come back to me.
The department didn't come back to you. Is that the they?
Neither the department nor the union came back to me. And I could only safely assume until now that the matters were not as rosy as they appeared, that there's no problem, the issues will be attended to in line with procedures on how those workers could be brought into the new establishment.
Because, you know, MEC, we're dealing with a massive fraud here in the sense that you presented with a plan to take mental health care users into the safe environs of existing facilities. And that doesn't happen. They're taken essentially to their death, to tell the truth. And that will keep on popping up to say, my goodness, they reported so falsely. Of course, the MEC says Dr. Silibano and Dr. Manamela reported falsely. But there's no gainsaying that she would have reported falsely to you, if I understand your evidence. So we actually have a disaster premised on a series of untruths and misrepresentations. I wonder how we overcome this. And what is your understanding of this horrendous situation where public officials misreport in a way that leads to so many fatalities?
I agree with you, Justice. I think it's abuse of trust that members of the public have in us. Total abuse of trust.
And in fact, would you agree that this could have been averted if the warnings had been heeded, all the warnings by the experts, by civil society?
I agree.
And would you consider then implementing a program in the provincial government to train your officials on their constitutional duties when it comes to Section 195 of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, engagement, the importance of engagement with civil society, and perhaps even within the Gauteng Department of Health, how to understand their ethical role when it comes to making health decisions?
Yes, I agree. And the Dr. Gwen Ramuhupa, the current MEC of Health in our province, is very committed to rebuilding the relationship with civil society in the health sector. It's one of her priorities, civil society and NGOs, given directly by me through cabinet that's something we should do. Let's rebuild our relationship with NGOs and civil society. But I have also made a commitment to a number of civil society players and leaders that not only in healthcare, the nature of our democracy is that we can't do what the Constitution says we should do if government does not work in partnership with all the organized communities, including civil society. So I'm also personally very committed to rebuilding the training, ethical training of officials. It's also a program that MEC Dr. Gwen Ramuhupa is prioritizing. And I personally would like to make sure that what has happened with the blatant ill treatment of mental health care users and the mentally ill patients never happens again.
Finally, Premier, our abiding concern as we sit here today, the end of January 2018, that we still don't know why this decision was taken. We still don't know why the decision to terminate the contract was taken, and then why it had to be rushed in the way it was. All we know is that more than 143 people perished. We can't even be certain of the exact number of deaths, because 62 patients are still missing. They could be dead, they could be homeless, they could be in jail. We don't know. So despite the many important developments that have happened through this process, we don't have an answer to the question that we had when we started.
I agree with you, Ms. Hassim, that we still don't know, and there are fundamental questions I have been asking myself as well, and some of them may be answered elsewhere, other than through the arbitration process. Were there other motives, including financial benefit, as a driving motive to do what has happened? I hope the SIU, the Special Investigation Unit, which is investigating the possible corruption on this, I hope it will provide answers. I'm saying I just hope. MEC Dr. Gwendra Mukhupa will, when appearing before here, deal with the issue of the 62 mental health care users who have not been accounted for. I am very certain that given the work she has been doing on our behalf, she will be able to deal with that issue competently when she appears. But we still don't have answers.
You know, Premier, in law, and I can say something about that.
Yes.
I've practiced that for over 40 years. When a citizen misrepresents facts to others, and as a result of that misrepresentation, harm ensues.
Yes.
That harm may be financial, and that harm may take other forms.
Yes.
That may very well constitute fraud.
Yes.
Let's bring it down to public officials who knowingly and consciously convey false information.
Yes, Justice.
With the consequence that others act, they or others act on that false representation, and harm ensues.
Yes.
A crime may very well have been committed.
Yes.
Do you know of any reason why people who would lie to you, make representations, those under them act on the basis of the representations made, and there are certain consequences that ensue that include death?
Yes.
Why they ought not to be held liable, even criminally? You probably may not have an answer to that, but I just thought that, in all fairness, I must put it to you.
It's a fairly straightforward issue, Justice, that where it's necessary for people to face criminal consequences, that their actions were criminal. I have no doubt in my mind, no slightest doubt, that should be pursued.
And could any of your troops, your officials, credibly come before this arbitration and say, I could not anticipate the likelihood, the probability of death if mental health care users of the kind that were kept at Life Esidimeni would die if they were sent to a place with no resources, no medication, no proper hydration, no food. Isn't it commonsensical? If you place people in that risk, they might die, and they have, in truth and in fact, died.
It's more than common sense, Justice, if you are a healthcare professional. If you are a healthcare professional, it's more than common sense. It is something that is in your training that you would know that this would lead to loss of life.
And some of your troops went on over a period and over time, knowing where they've placed the patients. For instance, some went to Siabadinga, some went to Anchor, others went to Precious Angel and saw the conditions. And yet they did Masejo, and yet they did not arrest that situation instantly until your intervention and the minister's intervention and the task team later. What should you make of that? When they have obvious constitutional and other duties to protect life.
Justice, that can lead you to lose faith in human beings as agents, as people who can act for good.
And coming back to Council's question, now knowing what you know, why do you think they made, the MEC, HOD, head of the Mental Health Directorate, why would they have persisted in a project that was so plainly likely to be murderous? What is the gain here? The gain might be political, the gain might be financial, the gain might be, I don't know what. But we're still struggling with, I think the families are struggling with,
yes,
with the decision and its real motive.
Yes. I'm struggling with understanding the motive, Justice.
Money? Was that a possible motive? Or is there any evidence that may support a motive of trying to make money?
Well, I hope, Justice, that the Special Investigation Unit that's following up on the issues that have to do with what exactly happened to the money will help shed some light on this issue. And those numbers are not small. For NGOs that have no capacity to do anything, that have not invested in decent infrastructure, those are huge monies.
You saw the schedules we had.
Yes.
In 1 year, some NGOs end up to 13 million.
Yes.
It's a range between like 500,000 to 13 million when I looked at the schedule for NGOs, and that is in 1 year.
Yes, I particularly, when the process of the Special Investigation Unit started, as per the Health Ombuds recommendations, I particularly ensured in my discussion with the DG and Advocate Mutibi, the head of the SIU, that the NGOs issue is very, very important about any link between that must be investigated. I mean, it's important to be investigated. Is there any link between any of those NGOs and our officials in the provincial government? We hope we will get somewhere. As things stand at this arbitration, the families don't have the answer.
And
I don't have the answer as well.
Some people are making the link, Premier, obviously, who worked for you, like Dr. Manamela, issued falsified licenses or unlawful licenses.
Yes.
And Mr. Jacobus came and told us that the underlying facts were all without foundation. So the law was used to allow NGOs to perform conduct or activities that would allow them to be paid, but in fact on an unlawful foundation. Have you worked that out? Can you shed light on that? Or what should we make of it? Just such blatant illegality of licenses that are totally unlawful and issued to entities unsuited to the purpose of caring for mental health care users.
Justice, I think there are times when you may think that people are, maybe they are incompetent, but there are decisions that cannot be explained from the point of view of incompetence. I think you can only think that these are criminally minded people. I wouldn't think that some of the things we are dealing with is just that people don't know the job. I think it's criminal mindedness. And that's why, even beyond the arbitration process, the process of finding answers and bringing people to book must continue.
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Justice. Just on that point, Premier, I'm not sure whether you're aware of it, but a letter, Section 27 wrote a 24-page letter on 28 March 2017, itemizing the potential crimes that have been committed based on information that it had. And there are many. It's a 24-page letter, ranging from murder to perjury. Have you had a chance? Have you seen this? Does this ring a bell?
Okay. If Justice, can you allow me, for your indulgence, Section 27, Sasha has been working with us in the...
Who's she? Never heard of her before.
In the family committee, with the family committee. And I've not, the letter has not been brought to my attention. I don't know if the DG in the province is aware of that. There's
fine.
Many things now that get brought directly to my attention.
Yes.
By Section 27.
Yes. I'm bringing it to your attention now, directly.
Okay. I would like to see the letter.
On behalf of Section 27.
Yes.
It is in the record of these proceedings.
Okay.
And perhaps if you could assist to follow up on those, on the list of potential crimes. Thank you for appearing before these proceedings, Premier. Justice, I have no further questions.
I'm going to move to Advocate Groenewald. No, or I'm going to move... Whoa, Advocate Krause. It's late in the day.
Justice, a concern has just been raised that some people are using public transport and they're not going to get transport home, and that's a concern. We're ready to continue, but I wonder if it's not unfair towards people using public transport. Yes. And I wonder if we couldn't start a little bit earlier tomorrow morning to make up for the lost time.
Yes. It's not an unreasonable consideration, not by any means. Premier, we've tried to and help your way today.
Yes.
6:30.
Yes.
I'm sure the generators here will run out of petrol very soon.
Yes.
We have to get everybody home and come back tomorrow. I'm quite happy that we start at 9 o'clock if you're inclined to do that, so that we can help you away. Will you be available at 9 o'clock tomorrow?
Justice, this is a very important process for the families, and I have to set aside everything in government until I have completed my testimony. So I will be here whenever you want me.
Yes. It might be a little ambitious. I'm coming from Pretoria, so I must be careful what I promise, whether I can fulfill that. But yes, I think, Advocate Groenewald, you've got to speak for your part.
I'll be here at 9 o'clock.
You'll be here at 9 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. If you can be and any other person coming from far, then, and what about the transport for family members? Can they make 9 o'clock here? I hear somebody saying we have to arrange with the drivers. I think let's stay with 9:30. Let's not have broken noses unduly. Let's start 9:30 tomorrow, and Advocate Creecy, you could start then, I think.
Thank you, Justice. My learned friend is very eager to proceed.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yes.
No doubt about that. We are going to certainly start first thing tomorrow morning at 9:30. But of course, the agreement is quite clear. We ought to finish tomorrow. And we've all arranged our lives around finishing the evidence tomorrow so that we can find new lives beyond Life Esidimeni. Okay. We are then adjourned till tomorrow at 9:30. Thank you.
Where did you get it?
Think about non-state actors and how important it is to involve them.